funding, and everyone needs returns on their capital. Everyone has savings, everyone needs a house. Every company wants to grow, and finance touches every single industry. So it's an industry where you get exposure to every aspect of the global markets. You're connected to the economy of not only the country that you live in, but economies all over the world. You learn about that, you see how it works, and you see the change that you're making by being involved in finance. Now, finance is very broad, and therefore you learn a lot more than you would as a specialized either engineer or specialized person in education, et cetera, et cetera. You're going to learn a lot of things that are applicable to many industries and to many jobs. We have people that have been in finance that now work in technology. We have people that were in finance and now work for the government, or they work for the World Bank, or they went back to, they could work for Procter & Gamble, Clorox. Why? Because they know the business. They know how the business works and how the industry works. So this is an industry, and this is a job that's going to give you exposure and a skill set that's transferable across the industry. So value that, take it into consideration. Also, a lot of people up here have talked, everyone up here has talked about the long hours. It's work hard, but there is compensation. You do very well in this industry. Do not get confused by that. People make a ton of money in this industry because it is very, very cool. It's very challenging. And also you work in investments. You take risk, and you're paid to understand risk and guide people through risk. So my last question is one point of advice for these young people on what they can do to ensure they're successful in the industry. So it can be anything from a skill that you can acquire to a common pitfall, or also to just something that you do every day. Sure.
I think, first of all, the fact that everyone is here, it says a lot about your character and what's important to you. And I can't stress enough, just building networks is so important. It's fiercely competitive in all our professions. I can just speak about the capital markets. I'm always amazed as to what type of candidates we get and what people are willing to do. It's so competitive, so I would just really stress how important building networks. Because everyone's a go-getter here, everyone's really smart in this room, but what really differentiates is a lot of things, but one is how strong your network is. That's really going to matter. How well do you relate? And then three, also, and there's a long list, but these are just top three that I can point out. Just, what differentiates yourself? Just what's your story? I certainly want to hear that when I talk to people. Is just what's your story? Don't be afraid to talk about it. What have you overcome? What are you really passionate about? What do you really care for? What's worth fighting for? So I would just, if you focus on a couple of things, build your network. It's a skill. It's something that you should take as part of your career process. Start now. Refine it. Continue to work on it. You can stumble with it, but it's so important. Understand who you are, what you want to do, and also just be able to talk about your story. Have that down. Don't be afraid to talk about it. It's who you are, and it's better for the other person to know who you are and what you represent as opposed to just kind of leaving it to chance.
If I could give one bit of advice, is this, I'll tell you this: don't make mistakes. Just don't make mistakes. This is a very detail-oriented business, and you have got to get the numbers right. Don't make mistakes. And let me go back a little bit, and I look at myself, and I see myself when I graduated from undergrad, and then I went on to my first job working for Bank of America on the commercial bank side. But I was used to, look, I got a 94 on my paper. That was awesome. I mean, I was stoked. I was happy with myself. When you're dealing with, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, when everything's denominated in millions, getting it 94% right is absolutely unacceptable. In this business, you don't get a lot of chances to make mistakes, and you usually get a chance to make one mistake, period. Don't waste it on something simple like math. It's assumed that will always be correct. If there's a mistake in judgment, if there's a mistake in some higher order type of issue, well, you know what, I think you're allowed to make that mistake once, you better learn from it, and don't do it again. But the math and the basics and the attention to detail has got to always be there at all times. So that's my advice if you guys graduate and move on to the world.
You stole it from me. Attention to detail. I mean, I want to be specific here. Attention to detail. Just, you have to pay attention to detail. I'll tell you, right out of college, I joined Lehman Brothers on the wealth management side. And I'll never forget the words of advice of my boss at the time, who was handling mostly clients, high net worth from the Middle East and Latin America. He says, Alejandro, I'm going to go to the Middle East for a month. You're going to run the desk. I got one piece of advice that my boss told me, I'm going to tell you, don't fuck up. And sure enough, I made a $14,000 mistake. That was almost a third of my salary at the time when I first started. And fortunately, I was able to pay it back. But that's the kind of pressure that you go through. And if you're able to undergo that kind of pressure and still have a love and passion for it and see the brighter side of finance, you'll do really well. But the other thing is determination. Don't give up. We're not all born with great skills and attention to detail. And in fact, if anything, my example is one of those where I learned attention to detail when I started my career in finance. And it was one of the biggest lessons that I learned. Other than that, if you're going to show up for an interview in finance, like it was mentioned earlier, show interest. Do your research about the company. Learn about them. Learn about the departments. Learn about what they do, what they specialize, how they compare to others. Be prepared to ask questions about the company itself. There's nothing more enjoyable than when I'm interviewing someone that they ask me about the company that I work for. That I know, oh, okay, this guy knows a little bit about New York Life, or he knows a little bit about Standard & Poor's. That is key. So do your homework. Attention to detail is key.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that. We just finished up our recruiting round for the summer internship class coming in this next year, and they asked me a question: what's the most important quality? Attention to detail is number one. Because that you do cost real money and real business, and you lose your credibility, particularly as an investment banker, where a lot of what you bring is your idea, and you tell a good idea, then you show on paper that something's wrong because the analyst put together that it was incorrect. That hurts everybody. So. That being said, let me ask a question. Are you guys a little older doing the recruiting process now, or do we have freshmen and sophomore that are just kind of thinking about this as an opportunity?
Freshmen, raise hands. Sophomores, juniors, seniors. Okay.
Great, okay. And the reason I ask is because I have two different sets of advice. I think for those of you that are younger, that are still thinking about this as an opportunity, what I would say is don't close the door on finance. And what I mean by that is if you have the opportunity to take the math or science class, do it. Because even though you may not need certain type of math, or at least that's what you think right now, it's like working out. It's just working on the muscle. It's a way of creating a more analytical way of thinking, a more methodical way of approaching a problem. And that's exactly what we do on a daily basis. And so do that now while you're younger. And pay attention. What is in the newspaper about, in my case, the California state budget, about what the Fed is doing, about what you're seeing in Ukraine and how that's impacting the stock market. While you're on Facebook, on whatever site you go to, also just stop in on Bloomberg just to see what the headlines are and read them. Those of you that are a little older that are looking at interviewing now and going through that process, our process, we look at 200 resumes. Do not have a typo on your resume. Do not send me a cover letter that says, I'm really looking forward to working at Merrill Lynch when I'm sitting here Morgan Stanley. That happens a lot. And the first thing to do is toss it out and even have a chance to prove yourself with whatever else is on your resume. Second thing is, we do a lot of these one-on-one interviews. And what you notice, people get pretty nervous. I don't know if you're the type of person who gets in front of someone and you know what you want to say, you do it really well, and you have no problems, great. It's okay to be nervous, but think about this. And someone told me this, but actually made a big difference for me. You know what happens when you're getting nervous, right? You start to breathe a little faster, your arms feel a little heavy. Your body is kind of going through this reaction yourself to run away from a cheetah or fight off some crime. That's what is happening to you, right? You're a little bit more aware because you're going through this fight or flight kind of response, right? So what I would say is slow it down. You think you're talking normally, you're going 100 words a minute, and I see this every time you go through the interview process that I may like somebody, we may like the GPA, the experience, but it doesn't come across really well because you're just not prepared to present in front of somebody. So definitely think about your approach in walking to that room, calming yourself down, breathing slowly, realizing that it's okay to take a breath, to talk slowly until you get your, because it always happens. You walk in, people are really nervous, and then after a few minutes, they calm down. And then you really see that come through. The quicker you can get to the point of being nervous, to calm down and being able to express what you're thinking, the better you are. And so focusing on the first few minutes, taking it easy, slowing down your speech, you actually relax your body and you start getting able to really focus on your thoughts and less on running away from bad guys or whatever your response is.
So I'll give some points as well, because this is a question that I'm also interested in. You guys heard attention to detail. You guys heard do not make a mistake, right? What I'll say about attention to detail is you work on that through time. The first place you can start is in emails. So before you send an email, read it 20 times over, read it 30 times over, spend 10 minutes on it, but make sure that that email is perfect before you send it. And you'll get more comfortable writing perfect emails, and eventually you'll write them with your eyes closed, but they'll be right. And you just get comfortable with checking everything. But as far as attention to detail goes, and this is something that we focus a lot in my group, the process. So process. You set up a process that is fail-safe, right? Foolproof. That is what we mean by attention to detail, is that you've thought about the process and you've put checks and balances in the process to ensure that you do not make a mistake. And as long as you have that process and that you've thought it through, if an issue arises, if you lose money, they can go back and say, what happened? Well, what was your thought process? Here was the process, this is what happened, this is where it failed, and this is how we're going to resolve it. I've lost a lot of money, right? I'm paid to make money and lose money. But when you lose money because you had a problem in the process and you didn't fix it and it happens again, that's when you lose your job. So processes break all the time. Errors happen all the time. I've made errors, $1 million, $2 million. It happens, right? But as long as you had that process in place, as long as you thought about it, it's okay. But when you don't think about it and you let it slip, and then an error happens or a mistake happens, that's when you lose your job. And that's what these guys are alluding to is, do not make a mistake. Do not mess up. It's because you always have to be thinking about what's the risk in my process? What's the risk in the job that I'm doing? Where do I have holes? Where can I address them? And make sure you're actively addressing them so that mistakes don't happen. And so with that, I think we'll open it up to the group for questions.
So,
all right. So I guess this is to all of you. What was one of the major obstacles that you guys had? I guess coming out of college and like planting your foot and getting your door and getting your foot in the door. What was one of the major obstacles that you had to overcome to be where you are right now? So I guess anyone of you guys.
Choose one.
Okay, Brian.
Sure. Let's see. Honestly, there were many. Let's see. When I was at USC, I started a small business. It was modestly successful, but I didn't go through the interview process. But I had a lot of friends that went through programs like SEO and Wall Street, different programs that enabled them to spend a summer in New York, etc. So after I sold my half of the business and went into consulting for about a year and a half, I was like, this is not what I want to do. This is really boring. I want to get into sales and trading and markets for a lot of different reasons, because I was getting exposed to that. I was trying to just go to any and all desks to try to find something new. I was that guy that would call and harass and pick up the trash.